and welcome to this first lecture in our series Taiwan 2021. As Ebba just said, my name is Torbjörn Lodén, Lotopi in Chinese, and I'm the head of the Stockholm China Center at the Institute for Security and Development Policy, abbreviated ISDP. This morning it is my very great honor and pleasure to welcome our speaker, Professor Chun-chieh in Taipei. It is quite wonderful that it is possible to organize a lecture in Stockholm with a speaker in Taipei. This is cross-cultural communication in a very concrete sense. As I'm sure many of you know, Professor Huang is a prominent scholar in the field of Chinese thought and also a well-known public intellectual. He combines his deep knowledge of traditional thought and culture with a keen interest and engagement in the issues of today. As a scholar, Professor Huang is probably most well known for his studies of Mencius, Mengzi, and for his work on East Asian Confucianisms in the plural. Professor Huang is currently Distinguished Chair Professor at National Taiwan University. In addition, he holds several prestigious positions, both in Taiwan and internationally. For example, he is honorary president of the Chinese Association for General Education and a member of the Academia Europaea. I first got to know about Professor Huang more than 30 years ago when I read a paper he had written on the moral philosophy of Mencius, which I found very interesting and liked very much. Ever since then, I have followed his work, although I have not read as many of his books. I think he has published altogether 27 books and articles that I would have liked to. Recently, I've been fortunate to cooperate with Professor Huang in the context of a couple of conferences, and I feel that a personal friendship is developing between us. I'm very happy about this and about our cooperation, which is very inspiring for me. Today, Professor Chun-chieh will speak to us about Taiwanese consciousness, within quotation marks, in transformation, retrospect and prospect. Professor Huang's lecture will last approximately 1 hour, and after that we will have a short session of questions and answers. So may I remind the audience that you can text your questions to us in the course of Professor Huang's lecture. With these brief words now, I yield the floor of the screen rather to Professor Huang. Please, Professor Huang, you are most welcome.
Thank you very much, Professor Roden, my dear old new friend. Old because in accord with the Buddhist samsaric circle, we might have known each other in our last life. Thank you very much for arranging today's gathering. Okay, I'm honored to be here to share with you some of my thoughts pertaining to the Taiwan identity. Taiwan, is a small island of 36,000 square kilometers and with 23 million people. And Taiwan is located at the juncture. Taiwan is located at the juncture between the Pacific Ocean and the Euro-Asian continent. And historically, Taiwan is the largest immigrant island of the Han Chinese people. And since the 18th century, when the Portuguese settler observing that Taiwan island, he shouted out "Yera Formosa." This shouting signifies that Taiwan had been entering the threshold of world history. Taiwan is a global island of cultural interaction. But politically, Taiwan experienced successive rupture of her history. 17th century, Taiwan is governed by the Dutch shortly, and then to be followed the Ming Dynasty China and Qing Dynasty China and the Japanese Empire, and after World War II, it returned to the governmental Republic of China. Taiwan had witnessed such concessive ruling authorities, and it seems to me that Taiwan may best be metaphorized by two key words. One is a symphony, that political entities from the West and from the East played a beautiful symphony on this tiny island. But on the other hand, Taiwan may best be characterized as a palimpsest, like in medieval Europe before the paper was invented. The different ruling authorities all carried a huge eraser to wipe off their memory of history of their former ruling authorities. So today, I want to focus my presentation on two problematic. The first one is what is a Taiwanese, so-called Taiwanese consciousness, Taiwanese? How does it change through history? And my second question is, in our 21st century, how is the Taiwanese consciousness can best be envisioned? Let's start from question number one that pertains to the formation and the development of Taiwanese consciousness. At the very beginning, I like to offer some operational definition. By Taiwanese consciousness or Taiwanese, I mean the way for the people who are living in Taiwan Island of knowing and interpreting their existential situation. So, in speaking of Taiwanese consciousness, the central question is identity, to be expressed in questions such as, who am I? What is Taiwan? Where is Taiwan heading for? This so-called Taiwanese consciousness admittedly keep changing in accord with the changes of time, locale, different locality, or social classes. Yeah, there in the so-called Taiwanese consciousness of the billionaires admittedly differ from those from the lower stratum of the society of Taiwan. In a historical perspective, the development of Taiwanese consciousness can conveniently be divided into 5 different periods. The first one, phase 1, covers from 17th to 19th century. In late imperial China, Ming and the Qing dynasties, the so-called Taiwanese consciousness were nothing but Chinese local consciousness, because the Han Chinese people in Taiwan today, their ancestors are immigrants from mainland China, primarily from the Fujian province and the Canton province. They gathered together on the basis of different language identities and ancestral origins. So in that imperial China, what is flourishing in Taiwan is local identity is expressed by consciousness of Zhangzhou Fujian or consciousness of Quanzhou Fujian. And history at this period witnessed massive armed fight among different local identities, and the Mainland people and the Hakka people have their different deities they worshipped. And in 1894, history witnessed the big change. In the PowerPoint, ladies and gentlemen, you are seeing a film videotaped by the Japanese Imperial Navy, videotaped one spot in Yellow Sea, North China. This is the first Sino-Japanese War in 1895. This war, 1894, signifies a big change of history. And our Taiwanese consciousness entered her second phase under Japanese colonization. In this particular period, Taiwanese consciousness is combined by two things. On the one hand, Taiwanese consciousness exhibit a clear class contradiction because since 1985, when Taiwan was conceded to Japan, the major capitalists and industrial tycoons are Japanese, while the workers and the farmers are the Taiwanese. So there is a clash between different classes. Yet, on the other hand, this class contradiction is simultaneously a kind of ethnic contradiction, because the ruling class are Yamato people. Yeah, that is the Japanese people, while the ruled class are the Han Chinese people. And in this phase two of our Taiwanese consciousness, we observed a serious tension between cultural identity and political identity among the Taiwanese. In 1895, the new Japanese governor of Taiwan invited the #1 billionaire Li Chun-sheng to visit Japan, and Li Chun-sheng, together with his family members, visited Japan for more than 2 months, and he composed a memoir on his trip to Japan, in which he said, though the new grass is rich, the old flavor is unforgettable. By new grass, he means his new political identity. Now he became a second-class citizen of in a colony, namely Taiwan, under the Japanese Empire. By old flavor, he means his own cultural identity. As a Han Chinese, he simply cannot put aside his own cultural identity. And the first general book of Taiwan was composed by literati Liang Qicao. In that book, Liang Qicao characterized himself 3 times as the leftover in the abandoned land. Taiwanese consciousness under Japanese colonization was primarily a kind of ethnic consciousness and class consciousness. The number one literati landlord, Lin Xiantang of central Taiwan, had invited Liang Qicao on March 24, 1911 to visit Taiwan. And Liang Qicao composed a poem during his sojourn to Taiwan that read, "Who expected that our beautiful land to be cut and lost? We troubled brothers, naturally cling together." Liang Qicao's poem tells us vividly the cultural identity that linked the intelligentsia from the mainland, Liang Qicao, and the Taiwanese, Lin Xiantang. Yeah, next one. Yeah. So under the Japanese colonization, among the Taiwanese, the consciousness, the so-called consciousness of motherland, has grown rapidly because of the oppression of the Japanese, and as well as their strong identification to the Chinese culture. Many intelligentsia imagined China, quote unquote, under the Japanese rule. Yeah, next one. In 1925 to 27, a literati from Guangdong who was residing in central Taiwan, Changhua, namely Meiqiao, have issued a Confucian journal to promote his cultural identity. And this is under Japanese colonization, is the second phase. And after the end of World War II, our Taiwanese consciousness entered the third phase after retrocession. After retrocession, Taiwanese consciousness appear primarily as a provincial consciousness. In a book of mine, Taiwanese Transformation, Retrospect and Prospect, enlarged edition 2014, I have discussed in detail the post-war Taiwanese consciousness as a provincial consciousness. Next one. As you know, the end of World War II is the biggest event after retrocession. The Taiwanese experience a kind of spiritual state. The anthropologists used a term ecstatic feelings, zealous penchants for retrocession can be observed everywhere in the island. That was August 15, 1945. So Taiwan, after the war, has returned to to the government of Republic of China. All right, next one. However, the new ruler from mainland, that is a KMT government, had shocked the local Taiwanese. The Taiwanese people witnessed the corruption and the discrimination of the new rulers from the mainland. And then in February 28, 1947, there broke out a February 28 incident, and its aftermath, the White Terror. And this tragic experience enlightened the Taiwanese that there are two Chinas. China is their cultural motherland, is no doubt is a spiritual hometown. However, the motherland, mainland China, is politically an imagined community. Yeah, they imagine Chinese culture is so splendid and so on and so forth. However, the real political China is so awful. Yeah. All right, and this third period of our Taiwanese consciousness may conclude in the year 1987, when the martial law was lifted. The lifting of martial law pushed our Taiwanese consciousness into its phase 4. In this post-martial law period, we witnessed many erupting new things. As a historian, it seems to me that the most impressive things is the awakening of individuality and the so-called new Taiwanese consciousness that followed. By awakening of individuality, I mean that throughout the long history of Chinese society, the situation was sociality overshadowed individuality. Each and every individual should be identified with a given group, be it a clan, a locale, or whatever. The individual sounds like a faceless individual. It throughout the history of Chinese civilization, it is only the post-martial law Taiwan that individuality became awakened. This awakening signifies the move of the larger Chinese community from self in itself to self for itself. I coined these two strange terms from Hegel's thing in itself to and things for itself. Now, the people in Taiwan, the self of the people in Taiwan became awakened. They want to be and for themselves. This is a historically a remarkable development. And next one are the reasons. Then I wanted to tackle some reasons for awakening of the individuality in our period number 4. After World War II, as everybody knows, Taiwan moved steadily from agriculture to industry and business society, and particularly in the realm of education. A quick development and massification can readily be observed. Democratization is a result of the emergence of the middle class and the massification of education. So, and the quick democratization leading to the liberation of the individual. All right, next one. Yeah. So this awakening of individuality means many things. Yeah. Taiwan wanted to be, Taiwan now became her own master. Taiwan refused to be subordinate to any other entities. This is the spiritual sort of mentality I have observed. The problem after the lifting of martial law in 1987 might be that the awakened individuality became somewhat decontextualized, became what the Westerners put it as a free spirit. As after the lifting of martial law, we heard the expression, "Nothing is impossible in Taiwan." Yes, indeed. And this fourth stage of Taiwanese consciousness end up as 2008, when the Ma Ying-jeou administration come to the stage. And in our phase 5, that started from 2008 till present day, we observed the transformation of this new Taiwanese consciousness. By new Taiwanese consciousness, I wanted to tell you tell you a story when Li Tenghui, then president, in the election gathering, raised Ma Ying-jeou's hand and asked you, Ma Ying-jeou, who are you? And Ma Ying-jeou shouted out, "I am the new Taiwanese," so as to win the vote. A new Taiwanese consciousness after 2008 entered the new stage. That is the the final new stage of Taiwanese consciousness. The role of Mainland China became more and more important, and it seems to me in our 21st century that this time-honored Taiwanese consciousness needed to be restructured, because in our 20th century the world changed. We witnessed the regrouping of world political, economic powers. COVID-19 changed so many things. The role of quote-unquote China in the development of our new Taiwanese consciousness may be summarized by 3 facts. Economically, we observed the inseparability between Taiwan and mainland. However, politically, there is a very bad tension between these two political identities. So our task should be how to maintain a kind of dynamic equilibrium in the future. Now, we are in a better position to appreciate the general character of the Taiwanese consciousness and its prospect in the future. First of all, let's make some remarks pertaining to the general character of the Taiwanese consciousness in history over the past nearly 400 years. In the historical spectrum, Taiwanese consciousness is primarily a kind of protest discourse. In the Japanese colonial days, the Taiwanese protest against the Japanese imperialism. After retrocession, the Taiwanese people, Taiwanese consciousness is a protest against the oppressive KMT authoritarian regime. And in the post-martial law days, we observe the protest against the CCP. Now, in the 21st century, our beloved Taiwan sounds like standing at the crossroad of history. Should we continue to protest against the PRC hegemony, against the USA hegemony, or maintain friendship with PRC, USA, and Japan, and the world, including Sweden? Yeah. Taiwan is not a retinue or a retainer of any other country, be it the USA, PRC, Japan. Taiwan is Taiwan. Taiwan, called Taiwan, is a true homeland of Chinese culture. Taiwan is a Chinese community par excellence. The serious problems we are facing nowadays include one, in sync with democratization. The politics in Taiwan became more and more cannibalized in the name of democracy, MIT, made in Taiwan. And under the name of democracy, democracy in Taiwan is primarily a Taiwan version of plutocracy. In our society, what is flourishing is egocentrism, self-assertiveness. This kind of slogans can be heard, especially in the election period. All the political figures shouted out, "Lan Taiwan arms, we Taiwanese are courageous, bold enough." That kind of egocentric mentality and self-assertive psyche is everywhere. However, in our 21st century, this is a century of politics of difference and politics of recognition. I observed the increasing importance of Taiwanese consciousness as a cultural discourse. All right, now let's move to the concluding remarks. In the 21st century, our new Taiwanese consciousness has to be transformed from the previous 400-year protest discourse to the future cultural discourse. The crisis we have today is the so-called Taiwanese consciousness, which had been twisted and distorted by numerous political figures, be them the blue ones or the green ones. Taiwanese consciousness nowadays is nothing but a blank subject. The ever-growing egocentrism has already led to the internal conflict among citizens. All right. Against this background, Taiwanese consciousness in the 21st century need to be renovated, to be transformed. And it comes to my mind that the late Jewish great philosopher Martin Buber says that we have to treat other people not in a relationship of I and it, but I and thou, you, as a human being. All right. So the core keyword here might be intersubjectivity. Intersubjectivity in the future may be a best cure to the present day egocentrism in Taiwan and the relationship between Taiwan and the mainland. That is to say, the new Taiwanese consciousness has to devote more attention to Taiwanese consciousness as a cultural discourse, because in the present day Taiwan, Taiwan is primarily a true divided state. A Japanese scholar had composed a book, Taiwan, subtitle, Divided Country and Democracy. The question that Taiwan is encountering today is like this: is democracy possible in a divided state such as Taiwan? You see, in the election occasions, the presidential elections, one side, the followers carries the national flag or Republic of China, which is the official constitutional name of Taiwan. But on the other hand, the other group of people did not carry not even one national flags, because they refused to recognize that country, namely Republic of China. This kind of divided states is even worse than the divided states of America under Donald Trump administration. So this is a very sad situation after democratization in 21st century Taiwan. Next one. In such a tragic situation in Taiwan's society and politics, value judgment has been torn apart by political figures. You say this is three, but in observing the same things, I say it is four. All right, this is the real situation that we people in Taiwan have today. So, what is the way out? It seems to me that we need to broaden the content of Taiwanese consciousness, because Taiwan have all kinds of cultural advantages in her interaction with mainland China. Taiwan is the beloved island of the heaven, and is gifted island. Taiwan has been so fortunate enough to meet immune from the disaster of Mao Zedong, from the disaster that the Chinese people suffered after 1949. Therefore, the Han-based Chinese culture in Taiwan does have the potential to lead the rising of Greater China in the 21st century. Next one. I pointed out a keyword, intersubjectivity. In a historical perspective, the principle of intersubjectivity may serve as the basis for a healthy future of Taiwanese consciousness, and may serve as a solid basis for the interaction between Taiwan and the mainland in the new world, or in the context of the new world order. Ladies and gentlemen, nearly 3,000 years ago, a guy named Mencius, who claimed to be the private pupil of Confucius, Mencius once said, only a benevolent man can submit to a state smaller than his own. Only a wise man can submit to a state bigger than his own. In the book of Mencius, we read, 为人者为能以大事小，为智者为能以小事大。Mencius was wise enough. If Mencius is alive in 21st century, he is the best candidate to be the director of Taiwan desk in Peking, and he would equally the best candidate to the Minister of Mainland China Affairs in Taipei. Ladies and gentlemen, it seems to me that only benevolence and wise may serve as the key to the peace of for cross-strait relationship and the development of Taiwan identity, and of course the future of Asia. All right, yeah. And next one. Thank you very much. Thank you for your attention. My sincerest wish for your spiritual growth and health. All right, we have say more than 10 minutes for Q&A. Yeah, thank you very much, Professor Roden. Rodobi, 老师，谢谢你. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, very much, Professor Huang. And as a matter of fact, we can extend our discussion a little beyond 10:30. We don't have to finish at 10:30 sharp. Again, thank you very much for your interesting lecture. You have given us a wonderful overview, I think, of the historical evolution of Taiwanese consciousness. And you have also provided incisive analyses of different aspects of this consciousness, which over the years, as you have explained, has changed considerably. And not least, and for me personally, perhaps your most interesting remarks concerned the present and the future. And thank you so much for offering your own ideas about the future. You are a pessimist when you look at the world today, and it's difficult to disagree with you on that point. But you are also an idealist who hope for and work for a better world, really. We have now received two questions by former Swedish ambassadors, by the way, which is interesting and which we should perhaps tell Professor Huang. The first question comes from Ambassador Lars Varje, who served as Swedish ambassador both to Japan and to South Korea, and who is also himself a Japanologist, who once wrote his doctoral dissertation about early Japanese history. And he raises the following question: how does the consciousness of the indigenous population relate to Taiwan's consciousness? The first time the Japanese army invaded Taiwan was in 1874. The reason, it was said, was to punish the local population for killing sailors from Ryukyu. Could you please say a few words about the relationship between the indigenous population and the Han Chinese?
All right, the question pertains to the relationship between the Han Chinese people in Taiwan and Japan, something in 1874.
Now, the relationship between the Han Chinese and the indigenous population that lived in Taiwan before 1874.
Oh, I see, right. Oh, the indigenous Aboriginal people, as we put it today, Aboriginal people in Taiwan. Yeah, the Han Chinese people immigrated from the mainland since the 17th century. And those who arrived in early stage are the Mainland people, and then followed by the Hakka, and the Mainland people occupied the fertile land. And Hakka has been pushed to mountainous areas, and in the history at that time, my impression is that the local indigenous Aboriginal people were those who were oppressed, who were pushed by the new arrival immigrant Han people. As my eyes is not that good, I cannot read. From the screen the question. All right. So, and in history, the Aboriginal people suffered quite a bit, and this is the reason why, after democratization, many ruling authorities, including the blue ones, the green ones, all want to do justice to the to the Aboriginal people. Yeah, this is all right. Yeah, I hope that my response is.
Thank you very much. May I follow up this question, perhaps?
Yes.
Today, one generally distinguish two groups of people in Taiwan, the Bunsheng and the Waisheng.
Right.
The notion of Bunsheng refers to people who lived in Taiwan before 1949, and
right.
Bunsheng, original Chinese in a sense, not aboriginal, but people who came to Taiwan early. And Waisheng is the concept that refers to the those inhabitants who came from mainland China after 1949, or whose parents, or nowadays even grandparents, came to Taiwan after 1949. Would you care to make some comments about how this about the differences between these two groups of people when it comes to consciousness?
Yeah, the demarcation between the local people, namely Bensheng or the outsider or mainlander or 外省人 was made after 1949. And you know, when I was young, I'm 本省人. When I was young, it is very rare that a 本省人 young man married with a 外省人 lady. That invisible discrimination is so clear, although it is invisible. And this kind of discrimination is primarily attributable to the oppressive KMT regime after retrocession. But we have to note that 本省人 and 外省人 have been living together for 70 years on this island. They have formulated a new type of what I call a new type of Taiwan identity, which I called the new Taiwanese consciousness. New Taiwanese consciousness. New Taiwanese consciousness as a whole is heading for a better life with our European friend put it, liberté, égalité, fraternité. Yeah. But what is important is economically, the mainland China played an increasing role in Taiwan's foreign trade. So this is the reasons why I suggested that we need to obtain a dynamic equilibrium between the economic inseparability and the political tension in the future. The 本省人, 外省人 is a kind of old-fashioned discrimination. Now we have, as Meiqiao shouted out in the election days, 我是新台湾人. I am the new Taiwanese. Yeah. Although the so-called new Taiwanese, the term is used primarily in political context. But my presentation today note that the so-called new Taiwanese is culturally Chinese, even more Chinese than those Chinese who suffered from the smash and the cultural revolutions in the mainland China. So it is so in this sense, and to that extent, Taiwan should be stand out once again as a torch of Chinese culture, shedding light to Greater China as a whole. The problem is the new power holders in present-day Taiwan refused to recognize, refused to accept that they are culturally Chinese. And this, as you know, in recent 5 years, Taiwan had been experienced a continuing process of what people call the de-Sinicization. And this is a truly sad tragedy currently happening. All right. Thank you very much,
Thank
Professor
you very much.
Logan.
Maybe I should also correct myself and point out that the meaning of Waishengren, the outsiders, should be people who came to Taiwan with the KMT government after 1945, I suppose, rather than 1949. That's a detail. The second question was posed by my friend Börje Ljunggren, who served as Swedish ambassador to the People's Republic of China and also to Vietnam. And Börje poses the following question. In order to preserve and deepen Taiwanese consciousness, you need to maintain the current status quo vis-à-vis the PRC. But Beijing's demand for reunification will grow as 2049 is approaching. How will you be able to cope?
All right. Yeah. This is, of course, everybody knows this is a difficult challenge. As a scholar intellectual, I would say, I'm inclined to say that the so-called reunification or independence would be meaningless if we do not pinpoint what kind of way of life we are heading for. If unification means that the so-called unification means that 23 billion people would be put in that iron cage, then unification is meaningless. If so-called independence means the coming of the rightist fascism, then the independence would be meaningless. This is my view. But your question pertains to the concrete strategy to cope with this very difficult situation, right? And I would say, besides politics, we have a cultural realm. Taiwan should not abandon its cultural strength. Taiwan is virtually the land of the true Chinese culture. As you know, my book on Taiwan in transformation started with a very paraphrase. Taiwan is the Chinese community par excellence. Taiwanese and the Chinese is not opposing entities. Taiwan is the true Chinese. Therefore, if the way to cope with this situation is if Taiwan can stand on the height of the Chinese cultural standing, then things may change. And Taiwan's situation may be different. This is what I have observed.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Then we have a third question from an anonymous attendee who writes as follows. Thank you for a very enlightening lecture. Given the parallels to PRC-ROC relations today, are there any indications that the short-lived Ming loyalist kingdom of Formosa played a role in early identity formation?
You mean the Koxinga?
Yes.
Yeah. Yes. You know, Koxing, since the 17th century, Taiwan became a pretty much cynicized, society. And today in Tainan City, you have Yanping Wang which is a temple devoted for Kuxinga. Yeah. And the Chinese cultural legacy has been started living in Taiwan from the days of Kuxinga. And it is also in the days of Kuxinga that Taiwan became a platform of cultural interaction between the Chinese and the Western. For example, in present-day Dutch language, I mean the language of the Netherlands, when our Dutch friend pointed T as te, te is from Taiwanese Mainland local dialect, te. When our Dutch friend says "rong bian," that is what the Taiwanese say, "run bian," "run bin." "Li hun," Taiwanese language, "li hun," has been transformed in the Dutch language, "li hun," "dao ge," "ba bao," all kinds of. Our Dutch friend of 17th century learned a great deal from the local dialect from Taiwan, and they give the people of Taiwan is their unit used to measure the land. In Taiwanese, we call it ga, jia, the size of the land. This comes from the Dutch, akka, A-K-K-E-R. So the Kuxinga, the legacy left by Kuxinga is primarily the Han cultural identity. But we have to also note it is from 17th century that Taiwan has interacted with the Western world. And all right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay.
Now my colleague, Professor Hans-Ingvar Roth at Stockholm University. Hans-Ingvar is a professor of human rights who recently published a book about Mr. Zhang Pengchun. You remember Zhang Pengchun?
Zhang
Pengchun.
Zhang Pengchun, I did not have. Okay.
Who was he was one of the people who wrote the Universal Declaration of Human Rights for the United Nations. Well, never mind. Hans-Ingvar raises the following question: what role today do Chinese intellectuals in mainland China before 1949, such as Hu Shi, Mr. Zhang, and others, play today? What is that? What is how are they looked upon in Taiwan today? What do people in Taiwan think of people like Hu Shi and so on?
Okay. All right. Very good question. The year 1949 signifies an annus mirabilis in the history of Taiwan. After democratization in recent, especially in recent years, after DPP, the importance of the year 1949 has been sort of belittled, decreased, even depressed. 1949 is so important. The great tragedy of the changing over from the Confucian China to Red China has driven a great number of enlightened intellectuals to this beloved island, namely Taiwan. Those include Hu Shi, of course, and Zhang Daqian, the great painter, and great philosopher, the so-called 20th century new Confucian philosophers, predominantly Tang Junyi, Xu Guguan, Mo Zhongshan, and all kinds of things. 1949 is a great blessing to this island. Of course, they played an enormous role on the in the development of Taiwan after World War II. Yeah, I agree that we need to devote more attention to the importance of 1949 to the history of Taiwan. All right. Okay.
I just sent you the Chinese name of Professor Zhang Pengchun. Maybe if you can you see the characters?
Oh, Zhang Pengchun. Yeah, I'm sorry.
Never mind.
did not read this person's. Yeah.
Never mind.
Yeah. Right.
Well, are there any other questions? If not, I would like to thank Professor Huang, of course, but I also have a suggestion. If Ebba agrees, I think I have a good idea. Professor Huang had prepared to let us listen to a piece of Chinese music to begin with. And I wonder, could we perhaps end by this? Do we have time for this, Ebba?
Oh, yeah. The music is played in the very beginning of our presentation. You know, it seems customarily I play the music before my class.
Okay.
In the classroom, because it seems to me that before learning that profound wisdom of Confucianism, the mind of my student needed to be softened. By the beautiful.
Wonderful idea. I thought that you would start with it here also, but do we have time to listen to it now, perhaps? If so, can we?
Okay.
No.
Yeah, maybe
Let me end by again thanking you so very much for taking the time to prepare this lecture and share your ideas with us. And I also want to say thank you to the audience and tell you that there will be at least 5 more lectures in this series of Taiwan 2021, and we will be back in February. Yes, Professor Huang?
Yes, Professor Rodden, yeah, mentioned in the music, you know, about 12 or 13 years ago, when I delivered a keynote speech to an international symposium at the University of Tokyo, I prepared a music from Taiwan, whose title is Xiang Si Shu, a tree of reminiscence. This is Taiwanese singers performed in New York City's Lincoln Center Music Hall, and pretty much touching. And if you agree, I'd like to play this Xiang Si Shu with Japanese translation. All right, for your pleasure. Thank you very much. Okay.
Soy
Okay.
Again, thank you very much, Huang, Professor Huang. We'll keep in touch. All the best, and also goodbye and thank you to the audience. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much. Yeah. Thank you. Bye-bye.